Hopefully, through your participation in the character challenge, you can point to some ways that you do feel you're growing more ethical as a person, that you're reflecting more about the kind of person you're trying to be, what sorts of choices you should be making, what sorts of actions you should be choosing, and that you are actually doing those things and choosing those things. So I hope you're experiencing some growth through your participation in this project. I thought it might be helpful for me to talk some about the nature of ethics and some basic ethical theories about how it is that we go about making moral decisions. Um, First approach to ethics is what you would call a rule-keeping approach. So for the nerds out there, the term for this would be deontology. It's a focus on the rules and what the correct rules are, and then trying to always follow all those correct rules at all times. So looking at the Ten Commandments, for example, would sort of align with this, where you have a clear picture in your head of what it is that a person ought to be doing, and we focus on having the right actions. Now, there is some value to this way of thinking because it gives you a definite point of orientation for your compass. People who want to live in the world and try and pretend that there are no absolute values, that nothing is completely right or completely wrong, but that everything's just kind of what's right for you or what's right for someone else. The problem with this is your definition of right and wrong is always changing. And when you undermine the stability of having some fixed goals and fixed targets, what you're really undermining is your ability ever to grow ethically as a person. Because speaking of growth means moving towards something. I can say I'm growing when I'm moving towards an objective, but if that objective is always shifting around every time culture changes its mind, well, really you can't say you're ever growing, because what would you even grow towards? Because nothing's fixed. So there's some value in a rule-keeping, action-focused kind of approach. Now, inevitably, sometimes you're going to have two different principles that are good principles that may end up in conflict with each other. So, there's all the classic examples of, like, what would you do if you're hiding Jews at your house and then the Nazis show up and they say, "Are you hiding Jews?" Is it, on the one hand, it's wrong to tell a lie, because that's a rule, you should never tell a lie. But on the other hand, if you were to tell the truth to the Nazis, it might mean that you're actually lying to the Jews that you promised to take care of. And so sometimes we end up with situations in life where two of our rules might be in conflict with each other. And so we have to find some different way to think about what it is that we're going to decide and how it is that we're going to decide it. A second way to think about how to make ethical decisions would be an approach that focuses on what the end goal is and use that end goal to sort of justify what it took to get there. Some would say how the end justifies the means. And there are occasions where this can be a helpful approach. Again, when two core principles are kind of in conflict with each other, and we have to decide which of them in a situation we're going to follow, it may be helpful to consider the greater goal. Why is it that I'm doing the things that I'm doing? What is it that it's supposed to produce? And if this would accomplish the greatest good for the most possible people, it may be acceptable to do something undesirable over here, not wanting to do that, but doing something less desirable for the greater good somewhere else. So this would be a common line of thinking for any Christian who participates in the military, for example. Because on the one hand, you'd say absolutely, Christians ought not to be taking people's lives. We're called to go save the world, and there are some very definite ways that sometimes the interests of any nation's military might be at odds with the Christian principles we're trying to live by. But in a bad enough scenario where there is someone who's, say, some awful dictator who's trying to do terrible things to millions of innocent people, you could justify that course of action by saying, well, I don't have any desire to go and to fight or to kill, but just the same, if I don't do anything, look at what this person is intending to do. And perhaps by stepping up and serving in that way, maybe I'm accomplishing a greater good, even though right now I'm doing something that I don't feel good about and will probably always wrestle with. So not something to talk about lightly by any means, but one of the problems with this kind of ethical approach. And again, the bigger title for this would be called utilitarianism. That's another big word, or teleology. So there's another two big words for you, but focusing on the end goal of what I'm doing. The problem with this kind of ethics is that you're assuming a lot about your own ability to predict the future. So think about the weatherman in your city and how much of the time are they even able, with all the full power of the technology they can harness, something as simple as predicting what the temperature or the rain might be the next day. How often do they get that wrong? But then apply that thinking to much greater issues. If you're quick to justify something that you believe to be wrong because you say, well, here's the outcome. Well, how do you know for sure what the outcome is going to be of this thing that you're doing right now? What if the end is actually something worse than what you started with because of a negative or bad thing you chose to do in service to what you had hoped might be a greater goal? There are some ways that that can be helpful in sorting out right actions, but neither one of those first two approaches, whether we're talking about just rule keeping or whether we're trying to be kind of predictive about what the outcome is going to be in order to sort through two maybe undesirable options. This is why I think virtue is such a great way to work on ethical growth and ethical formation. So when Paul would teach us, for example, to fix our eyes on Jesus, Jesus teaches us in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just about looking at the surface level of what our actions are. It's about looking deeper into the heart of the kind of person that I'm trying to be. I fix my eyes on Jesus. I try to live as a part of Jesus's kingdom. And what's great about that is that it doesn't cause me to simply wait until I have an ethical dilemma and say, well, is it a matter of which rule I'm going to keep and how I sort that out? But if we're trying to actively be a kind of person, I'm not waiting around for a dilemma, but instead, I'm always keeping my eyes fixed on the prize, so to speak. I'm looking at Jesus and I'm saying, if I'm trying to be like Jesus, I want to be that way all the time. So if I'm going to be a Christian, what are the things that a Christian does when they wake up in the morning? What's the way that a Christian would act at school or at the office, at the workplace? What are the sorts of things that a Christian parent would be doing in their household? What would a Christian be doing with their free time or on the weekends? You ask those questions proactively and say, here's what I'm trying to become, and I'm going to move towards that. Now, along the way, I may have some ethical dilemmas. I may have some tough choices to make in life, sometimes even choices that put two seemingly undesirable options on the table, maybe more than two undesirable options. And, prayerfully, faithfully, we have to try and sort through those things when they come. But in focusing on virtues, I'm already trying to be a certain kind of person, not waiting for the dilemma, not waiting for the hard choice. I've already decided who it is that I'm trying to be. And because I've already made that choice, hopefully that trickles down into the other areas of life where we have to sort through different kinds of decisions. So I hope this will be a valuable study for you. We're using Proverbs as a way to talk about character and about ethics, and by fixing our minds on the ideals of who it is we want to be, hopefully that affects us at a core heart level, not just at the surface level of what our actions are, but at the heart level of what is my identity in Christ and how am I going to choose to live into that in every circumstance, not just in reaction to the harder circumstances. So hopefully those will be some helpful things for you to think about and the value of what it is we're trying to do in fixing our minds on virtues and character and all the things God is inviting us to through the book of Proverbs.